The year is 1944. The month, December. The place, the Ardennes forest, a sprawling, snow-laden tapestry of deep shadow and biting cold. After the liberation of Paris and the swift Allied advance, the war in the West seemed all but decided. A false sense of victory, a dangerous overconfidence had settled over the Allied lines, a slumber soon to be violently awakened. For weeks, the American GIs occupying this ghost front had grown complacent. They believed the Wehrmacht was broken, that the war would be over by Christmas. What they did not know was that deep within the shattered Reich, a new, audacious, and profoundly dangerous operation was being born from the mind of Adolf Hitler himself. Its architect, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, a man whose face, scarred from duels, was a legend among the Waffen-SS, and whose reputation as Europe's most dangerous man was utterly earned after the daring rescue of Mussolini. Skorzeny was given a mandate that defied the laws of conventional warfare: to raise a commando unit, equip them with captured American uniforms and vehicles, and have them infiltrate the U.S. lines. The objective: to sow pure, paralyzing chaos. The name: Operation Greif, the Griffin. German engineer, logistics officer. When the order came, we laughed. We were told to make our panzer tanks look like American tank destroyers. We used sheet metal, paint, and sheer will. It was a carnival trick, a pantomime of war. But the real performance was that belonged to the men in the borrowed uniforms. The logistical hurdles were monumental. The unit, Panzer Brigade 150, desperately needed American equipment: jeeps, trucks, uniforms, dog tags, K-rations, scraped together from captured stockpiles. But the critical ingredient was not hardware, it was humanity. Skorzeny needed German soldiers who could not only speak English, but do so with the authentic, unhurried cadence of an American GI. The search began, an urgent, silent dragnet across the Wehrmacht, seeking men who had lived in the States, had worked in Brooklyn, or had simply listened to enough intercepted radio chatter to master the vernacular. These chosen few were gathered at a secret training compound, sworn to secrecy under the most draconian terms. They studied American slang, military ranks, and pop culture minutiae. The details were forensic: the tilt of the helmet, the way an American officer might hold his cigarette, the very specific, almost casual manner of a U.S. soldier behind the wheel of a jeep. They were becoming ghosts, slipping between the worlds. Then, on the bleak, pre-dawn morning of December 16, 1944, the quiet of the Ardennes shattered. The largest German offensive on the Western Front, the Battle of the Bulge, was launched. Hidden within the roaring tide of German tanks and infantry, like needles in a haystack, were the small reconnaissance teams of Greif. Their mission was simple, yet strategically profound: capture the bridges over the Meuse River, creating a panic-stricken route for the main German advance. But their primary weapon was not the Sten gun or the sabotage charge, it was deception. They would spread misinformation, destroy communications, issue false orders to American units, and most importantly, switch the road signs. The deep, resonating sound of the German advance was the thunder, but the Greif Commandos were the silent lightning, striking the nervous system of the enemy. The first reports began trickling in, reports dismissed as battle confusion. A jeep full of Americans asking odd, highly specific questions about the location of HQ. An entire company of Shermans inexplicably turning onto the wrong road, guided by a newly placed sign. The stage was set for a deadly game of cat and mouse, played out in the fog of war, where the enemy could be anyone, anywhere. The irony was palpable. The war was supposed to be ending, yet here was a Nazi plot so bizarre, so unprecedented, it could only be the act of a desperate, dying empire. The fear was beginning. The confusion and paranoia generated by a few dozen men would soon paralyze an entire army. The true story of how they were unmasked is a testament to the quick-witted, ground-level intelligence of the ordinary GI. If you want to continue uncovering the forgotten psychological battles and technological secrets of W2, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. The initial success of Operation Greif was not measured in captured territory, but in sheer, untraceable paranoia. The commando teams, numbering no more than 44 highly trained men, were now loose behind the lines. Their presence was a psychological weapon designed to corrode trust and paralyze command. To understand their insidious power, we must examine the technique. Each four-man team typically consisted of a driver, a radio operator, a saboteur, and the crucial element, the man with the flawless American accent, often carrying forged papers and American equipment, including the iconic M1 Garand rifle and captured combat jackets. They drove authentic-looking American jeeps and trucks, some crudely painted to mimic the olive drab of the Allied forces. Imagine the scene. A freezing, exhausted American military policeman standing guard at a critical crossroads near the town of Vilsalm. Out of the snowy darkness approaches a U.S. Army jeep, moving quickly. The driver, a German corporal named Manfred Pernis, speaking perfect, breezy New York English, waves casually. The MP hesitates. The rules of engagement had changed overnight. Anyone could be an enemy. This was the central thesis of the operation, planting the seed of doubt. American MP guard. After the first few days, you stopped trusting your own shadow. You'd stop a truck, ask for papers, and the guy would sound exactly like the kid from back home. But then he'd say he's heading to New Jersey, or call his rifle a pistol. You had to know the lingo. The silence in the back of your head was the worst part. Is this guy real, or is he a spy who's going to plant a charge under this bridge? Skorzenny's men went to work. Near the village of Poteau, a German team successfully convinced an entire U.S. unit to withdraw from their defensive position by posing as American military police, delivering a false, urgent withdrawal order. Entire supply convoys were successfully diverted onto dead-end roads, wasting precious hours and fuel needed for the counterattack. The chaos was viral, spreading through rumor faster than any intelligence report. The American High Command, initially bewildered, soon recognized the pattern. General George S. Patton himself famously had to increase his own security. The most incredible rumor, perhaps deliberately spread by a captured commando named Gunther Billing under interrogation, was that the ultimate goal of Greif was the assassination or kidnapping of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. This one rumor was enough to briefly confine Eisenhower to his headquarters in Versailles, under heavy guard, proving the operation's psychological efficacy. But the Germans were not perfect. Their meticulously trained English speakers sometimes slipped. They knew the books, but not the lived experience. They would ask for gasoline when a GI would simply ask for gas. They knew the names of baseball teams, but stumbled on the names of cartoon characters or the specific lyrics of the American national anthem. The Allied counterintelligence, driven by desperation, instituted a radical, field-level screening process. Every checkpoint became a trivia quiz. Soldiers were asked, "Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend, Minnie?" or "Who won the World Series last year, the St. Louis Cardinals?" It was a deeply flawed, culturally biased system that led to many genuine American soldiers being delayed or even briefly detained. But it was a response born of absolute necessity. The Americans were fighting back with American culture itself. The pressure was mounting. The risk of being captured in enemy uniform was not just defeat, it was the immediate, unceremonious execution as a spy under the Hague Convention. The stakes were life and death, but the German commandos, led by men like Lieutenant Lothar Eichert, continued their deadly, silent infiltration, banking on the Allied confusion to give Hitler the few critical days he needed. Their clock was ticking, and the American guards were getting smarter. The crisis point came on December 17, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge was barely 48 hours old, and the Allied rear was a stew of rumor, misplaced units, and extreme mistrust. American security had been raised to a fever pitch. Checkpoints, once casual nods of recognition, were now rigorous interrogations, turning every road into a gauntlet of suspicion. The true vulnerability of Operation Greif lay not in the Germans' mastery of the English language, but in the ingrained cultural instinct they could never truly replicate. The German soldier, trained for rigid hierarchy and logistical efficiency, drove differently, spoke differently, and possessed a different set of unconscious priorities. This is where the infamous road sign trick came into play, a brilliant, simple tactic deployed by American GIs who had tired of the complex trivia quizzes. At a dusty, snow-covered crossroads near Aiwaile, Belgium, a team of American military police had been observing a peculiar pattern. Several road signs, indicating key towns like Malmedy and Eupen, had been reversed or rotated. The Greif teams had orders to do this, diverting American forces, but the act itself provided an opportunity for their capture. On the evening of the 17th, a German commando team, traveling in a captured American jeep, approached a checkpoint. Inside were Sergeant Gunther Billing and Corporal Manfred Pernass. They looked the part. Their uniforms were correct, their papers convincing, and their conversation was fluent American English. The American guard, however, had a different tactic. He pointed to a large, newly erected metal sign, crudely painted but clearly legible. Liège, 20 miles. The American guard, DMP. I asked them the easiest thing. Hey, buddy, how far is it to Liège? Billing, he looked at the sign, paused for maybe half a second, and then he just read it out, same as anyone. 20 miles, pal. That's when I knew. The fatal flaw was not the answer. It was the unquestioning acceptance of the official sign. A genuine American soldier, conditioned to military bureaucracy and the reality of a chaotic war zone, would have likely questioned the sign's accuracy, joked about the military's poor logistics, or simply relied on his own map or memory. The German commando, trained to respect and obey military markers, simply accepted the data. His half-second pause, followed by the verbatim reading, was the linguistic equivalent of a salute. The jeep was searched. Beneath the seats they found explosives, a radio with German markings, and, most damningly, German field grey uniforms worn underneath the American olive drab. The discovery was not just a capture, it was the irrefutable confirmation of the entire terrifying plot. Under brutal interrogation, Billing broke, revealing the full scope of Operation Greif, including the rumor about Eisenhower. The news flashed across the Allied command like an electric shock. The psychological warfare had reached its zenith, turning every American soldier into an amateur counterintelligence officer, but at a cost: the paralysis of the Allied command. The immediate consequence was the execution of the captured commandos as spies, a grim reality of the war. The phantom Americans were unmasked, but the chaos they had sown would persist for weeks, a lasting stain of suspicion on the trust between allies. The capture of the first Greif teams was the turning point, but the fear had already taken root. The immediate, over-the-top reaction by the Allies demonstrated the psychological victory Skorzeny had achieved. The mere rumor of the plot was more effective than the actual operation itself. The result was an epidemic of friendly fire and wrongful detentions. Thousands of American troops were subjected to aggressive questioning at checkpoints. The absurd cultural quizzes continued, creating monumental traffic jams that, ironically, achieved the very same goal as the German saboteurs: delaying the Allied counterattack. American tank commander: we were racing to the front, every minute counted. Then we get stopped by some MPs, and they're asking me about Betty Grable. Betty Grable? I almost lost it. You had men who'd been fighting since D-Day, and they're being detained because they couldn't remember the name of some movie star. The Germans didn't even have to shoot at us. They just had to make us not trust each other. The human toll on the German side was swift and final. Of the approximately 44 men who successfully infiltrated the lines, 18 were captured. They were treated as spies, not combatants, and their fate was sealed. The captured commandos, including Billing and Pernass, were subjected to a military tribunal. Despite Skorzeny's later argument that wearing an enemy uniform was a legitimate ruse de guerre, a legal trick of war, the moment they engaged in combat or reconnaissance while disguised, they were deemed spies. The judgment was death by firing squad, carried out swiftly at Henri Chapelle and other sites. This grim justice sent a clear message, but it failed to quell the paranoia. The confusion over uniforms and identities led to tragic mistakes. Genuine American soldiers who happened to lose their dog tags, speak with a peculiar regional accent, or simply couldn't recall American trivia were treated as suspects. The suspicion was so deeply ingrained that even high-ranking Allied officers were not immune. The most famous near-victim was General Bruce C. Clark, commander of the U.S. 4th Armored Division. He was stopped at a checkpoint by an overzealous young MP. The guard demanded proof of his identity. Clark, exasperated, Asked the MP what the capital of Illinois was. The MP replied, "Springfield." Clark corrected him, "No, Chicago." The MP, convinced he had caught a German spy, the capital is indeed Springfield, prepared to arrest the general. It took intervention from a higher-ranking officer to clear the confusion. The story, though almost comedic, illustrates the utter breakdown of trust and the pervasive climate of fear generated by a few dozen men. In the end, Operation Greif was a tactical failure, but a psychological masterpiece. They failed to capture the Meuse bridges, the ultimate goal of the operation. The sheer lack of American equipment and the logistical nightmares faced by the ad hoc Panzer Brigade 150 meant the large-scale planned deception never materialized. Yet they successfully diverted entire companies, stalled vital supply lines, and most importantly, forced the Supreme Allied Commander into confinement. The memory of the Phantom Americans lingered long after the Battle of the Bulge faded. It was a potent demonstration that in a technological total war, the oldest weapon, deception, could still be the most effective, particularly when wielded with strategic precision and a cold disregard for the rules of engagement. The Battle of the Bulge, a desperate final paroxysm of Nazi ambition, sputtered to its end in January 1945. It was a crushing German defeat, costing the Wehrmacht an estimated 100,000 casualties and irreplaceable heavy materiel, sealing the fate of the Western Front. Operation Greif, the sideshow of deception, also faded into history, but its toxic legacy and the confounding story of its commander, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, remained deeply controversial, a testament to the blurring line between legitimate warfare and outright criminality. Skorzeny's unit, the 150th Panzer Brigade, was hastily dissolved, having failed spectacularly in its primary mission to secure the vital Meuse bridges. Yet Skorzeny himself was not finished. He was too notorious, too effective to be ignored. After the war, he was captured and brought before a military tribunal at Dachau in 1947, charged with the violation of the international laws of war for commanding troops who had engaged in combat while wearing enemy uniforms. The irony of the trial was stark, a moment where the chilling realpolitik of war met the fragile idealism of law. The German commando, whose face was synonymous with daring ruthlessness and the most audacious missions of the war, was defended by a bizarre and extremely technical legal loophole drawn from the Hague Convention of 1907. The defense's argument was meticulously focused. While Skorzeny's men wore American uniforms for the ruse of approaching and infiltrating the enemy lines, an act universally accepted as a legitimate ruse de guerre, they had been strictly instructed to remove the uniforms and change into German battle dress before engaging in actual combat, reconnaissance, or opening fire. It was a distinction as fine as a razor's edge, yet crucial under international law. The prosecutor, Dachau trial, recreated, "The uniform is more than cloth and color. It is a promise. It is the distinction between soldier and assassin. These men did not simply disguise themselves, they weaponized the trust implicit between combatants, creating a terror that spread like a plague through the rear of the American army. That is not war. That is psychological terror. The execution of the captured men was justified under the convention, and the commander bears the ultimate responsibility." However, the defense prevailed. The tribunal could not definitively prove that Skorzeny's men had engaged in direct combat while disguised. Witnesses were even brought forward from the British Special Forces, who testified that they too occasionally used enemy uniforms for infiltration purposes. This distinction, however fine and ethically corrosive, ultimately led to Skorzeny's acquittal on the specific charge relating to the uniform violation. He walked free in 1947, an unnerving, stunning legal victory for the Scarface Commando, even as his captured soldiers, those who had fulfilled his orders, had faced the firing squad. Historian analyst, the Skorzeny trial became a seminal case study in the laws of war, confirming the chilling reality. Deception is a legal component of strategy. Fighting in enemy uniform is not. But Greif tested the spirit, not just the letter of that law. It was an operation built not on physical strength or technological superiority, but on the fragility of human perception and the shattering of psychological security. Its target wasn't the tank, it was the mind of the soldier at the checkpoint. The trial didn't clear Skorzeni's name, but it defined the edge of acceptable strategic deception. The lasting impact of Greif was profoundly doctrinal. Post-war military strategists, particularly within the nascent Special Operations Commands of the United States and the United Kingdom, absorbed the chilling lessons of the Ardennes paranoia. They recognized that a small, highly specialized team, utilizing advanced psychological warfare and deep cultural immersion, could achieve strategic effects wildly disproportionate to their actual numbers. This operation directly foreshadowed the rise of modern special forces, units built around the principles of infiltration, deep reconnaissance, surgical sabotage, and demoralization behind enemy lines. The very methods used by Greif, the detailed study of enemy culture, the mastery of the dialect, the creation of plausible cover stories, became central, formalized tenets of advanced military planning and intelligence operations for decades to come. The story of the Phantom Americans serves as a grim and utterly fascinating reminder of the true unromanticized nature of total war, a conflict fought not just with steel and gunpowder, but with words, wit, and the sheer force of nerve. The final poignant image is that of the young American military policeman, shivering in the cold, holding a rifle on a man who looked and sounded exactly like a friend, forced to rely on the simplest of cultural cues, the difference between gas and gasoline, a baseball team's name, or a question about a road sign, to discern friend from foe. The German Commandos of Operation Greif proved that the perfect spy is the one you already trust. They spoke perfect English, they wore the right clothes, but in the end, they were betrayed by the very culture they sought to mimic, a culture defined by casual disbelief, local slang, and an instinctive, healthy suspicion of the official narrative. Their desperate gambit failed to win the war, but it succeeded in giving the Allies a chilling, unforgettable glimpse into the abyss of psychological warfare, forever changing the way armies guarded their rear. The ambiguous road sign was their downfall, a small piece of deception that could only be detected by a genuine American soldier who understood that in the chaos of war, you never simply trust the sign. From the scarred face of Skorzeny and his narrow escape from the gallows to the quick-witted MP at the crossroads, this battle of wits shaped the future of modern deception and special operations. If you found this dive into the psychological secrets and legal controversies of the Second World War compelling, hit the like button and share this crucial, overlooked chapter of history. And for more deep-dive historical documentaries on the forgotten heroes and chilling tactical innovations of war, make sure you are subscribed. The fight for history continues.